Good afternoon, and welcome back to this episode of the Here to Serve podcast. My name is Laura Bowen, and I'm the Executive Director at USTA Florida. My guest today is Antoinetta Mosley. She is a courage curator, a keynote speaker, and an author. And she's on a mission to help individuals and organizations consistently cultivate courage to reach their highest potential. Antoinetta is the Chief Encouragement Officer, or CEO, at Courage Candy Company, a strategic consulting firm that specializes in courage cultivation and culture building. As a culture strategist, Antoinetta has worked on a range of projects for organizations of all sizes, including small to global nonprofits, as well as Fortune 500 companies. She travels the country as a sought-after speaker, and her commitment to her field recently earned Antoinetta recognition as one of the top 100 HR influencers by Engagedly. This year, she published her book, 6 Months of Courage Candy: Consistently Cultivate Courage to Reach Your Highest Potential. The book is filled with daily inspirational messages designed to help readers increase their courage consciousness over a period of 6 months. I've had the pleasure of working with Antoinetta for several years now. She has trained our staff and many of our aspiring leaders on how we can have more courageous conversations and be more effective working as a team, and how I can be more effective as a leader. In today's conversation, we're going to talk about what it takes to be a leader in today's working world. I hope you enjoy the pod, and I look forward to reading your comments on our posts. Yes, you've been in my network now for several years, and I'm just so blessed and grateful to have you. And thank you for spending the time with me today.
Of course, so excited to be with you and the network again. USTA is just really special to my heart personally and professionally. So thank you for having me back again.
Today, we're going to talk about a topic that I've wanted to talk to someone about for a long time, and you are the absolute perfect person because you're courageous, but you also have empathy, and I always feel really comfortable talking to you about topics that might be a little bit difficult. So I did want to talk to you today about sort of the experience that leaders are having in today's world. And the first thing I wanted to do was maybe invite you to share some of your thoughts about the responsibilities that leaders have today, the expectations that the world has of those leaders, and maybe where those things don't match up so good at times.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's so important when I love leadership. I've always loved leadership. And I think it's so important, whether we're talking about leadership or equity or whatever it is, to really define and whether it's a group or organization or personally, what does authentic leadership or courageous leadership, what does that mean? And what type of leadership do we want? And I think often individuals have expectations of their leaders that may not be expressed or stated, but people often judge leaders based on their personal experiences, biases, what type of leader they would love to have. And so I think it's so important as leaders for us to actually let people know what type of leader we are. Because if not, unfortunately, it's often defined for us of, I expect you to respond to everything that happens in the world, or everything that individuals may be concerned, enraged, excited about. And so I think as leaders in today's day and age, we really have to make sure we're courageous enough to say, this is the type of leader I am, and this is how you can expect me to lead. And also, I would love to hear your thoughts, but I've realized oh, wow, I can't change my leadership style and the way I lead for each individual person.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We had a leadership training earlier this month, and the very last thing they had us do was to write down our leadership philosophy, our personal leadership philosophy. And it struck me exactly what you just said is like, we don't communicate that ever.
Yeah.
I mean, I never had. And so you had to write down these like 3 to 5 themes of what was your leadership philosophy, and then you were encouraged to share it. And so that was something I wanted to do, with my team coming up on one of our meetings. And I wanted to share it with you today because I feel like, wow, if I had just maybe shared this years ago or took this time, like it would clear up a lot of those expectations that people may have, like you are one thing versus
Yes.
who you are as your authentic self. So for me, my themes where I do what I say and I don't ask others to do what I'm not willing to do. Like that's a very core value for me. I do have a team first mentality and I do expect that of others. If you help others succeed, then the team will succeed. I do the right thing, even when it's, or especially when it's hard. And that gets to your, what you do with your Courage Candy and your courageous work is that it does take a lot of courage to make choices, make decisions, and do things that people are not going to like. And that happens often. I do try to respect everyone and demonstrate empathy in response to anger or dissatisfaction. And that they said you could have aspirational elements of your leadership. And I said, if I was going to have an aspirational one, it would be this of like, that I want to do that all the time. I think I've gotten better at doing that more often. But that takes practice. And then thinking critically, which I think everyone who knows me is something that is very core to my being. It's like challenging my thinking, my assumptions, and challenging others' thinkings and assumptions. And sometimes we always default to the easy answer. Yes. And I know that I irritate my team many, many times. I think it happened today where I was like, that you're not giving me the answer. You're telling me all the problems. Let's think critically about the answer. Solve. And it's hard. Yes. It's not one answer. It's multiple answers. But your goal is to get to the answer, not sit and stew in the problem. So it was interesting because just even writing this down, I thought, oh gosh, what a miss on my part that I haven't ever shared that with people. You just assume people know you. Like they know these things matter to me. They know that's who I am. But the truth is they really don't.
No, I think that's beautiful that you did that and that your team is going to get that from you, because I think that's one of the like biggest gaps or pitfalls I've seen is just the assumptions and presumptions that come up, right? Not just from staff to leaders, but the other way around.
Yes.
Right? Like we all often, right? We're all biased. We all have implicit biases. We all have known biases, right? That hopefully we're working through. And so our brain wants to make those quick judgments because we have so many thoughts in a day that our brain wants us, right, to quickly go, okay, you are this, you are that. Okay, this is how I deal with you. So, and it's just like that, unfortunately, is not life. And it clicked to me probably like 8 years ago. I was just, I think, really blessed that this happened. But with my team, we did these different personality tests, and then we went to lunch together to talk about what things we resonated with and what things we didn't. And my personality test says that I do not like conflict. And so my team member said, "This isn't you." And I said, "No, it actually is." Yeah. And so we had this just major breakthrough, and it changed how I led forever, because I realized as a leader, we often, right, we have to have a strong front and we have to make tough decisions. And they were thinking, right, for me, that was easy, and I think especially now being a courage curator, people may think like, I just love, right, making these courageous, tough decisions or speaking out or speaking boldly. And it's actually very difficult for me. And so they got to see me as a human, as a person, versus, oh, this is our strong leader who they thought did not mind conflict. And I actually am a peacekeeper and a peacemaker, and I actually would love to avoid all conflict at all costs. So yeah, I'm excited for your team and you and just others listening to go, wait, maybe they don't know certain things about the core of who I am.
Yes. I think that's so powerful what you just said, because I remember at this job, before I was promoted, I remember my previous executive director said to me, and he said, you're tough. You don't have feelings." And I said, "No, it's actually the opposite. I feel so deeply for people that I'm very mindful of not making decisions based on that,
Yep.
and I
Yep.
try very hard to because thinking critically is something that's such a core value to me, is being able to
Yep.
separate having a great deal of empathy for this situation and feeling very deeply, and I have to find a way to sort of process those emotions and feelings, particularly when I'm making difficult decisions. I do not enjoy that.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy making decisions that I know people are going to dislike or be unhappy
Yep.
about, but I also understand that that's part of growth and critical thinking, and it's a challenge area for me. So very very similar what you
Yeah.
said. Oftentimes, the things that we dislike the most or least comfortable for us are the spaces that we have to embrace.
Yes, yes. And I think also just, telling people about yourself. It's interesting. And I know we were kind of talking about this, but people see one piece of your life
Yes.
or even one season of your life or one time period. And so I realize now, for so much of my life, like everyone knew me as an athlete, and that was like a central identity that people knew about me. And
Mhm.
now, in my late 30s, that's not the case anymore. And so I have to tell people, oh, like I value the team. And I love just what you were saying about solution oriented. And like, even with my husband, I'm like, no, I want the solution, right? Like I'm a team person. Like, let's work through this, the
Yeah.
muddy, messy middle. Like, let's do it together. And that comes from running, track in high school and in college and being that leader. And I realized, oh wow, like I have to tell people now, right, that my core leadership stems from being an athlete much of my life and from being the oldest of four. And so often people think,
Mhm.
right, especially as a Black woman, that's what informs your leadership style the
Mhm.
most. And so I realized I have to actually tell
Mhm.
people, like, these are the things that inform my leadership style the most.
There's a great book, Malcolm Gladwell has that, Talking to Strangers, and I thought that that really codified a lot of the importance of talking to people, and what we miss a lot of times with bias and not understanding people is just you have to talk to people more, and
Yes.
and the more we talk to each other and share, the better. I did want to ask you a question though about generations in the workforce, because
Yeah.
that's sort of this other complicating factor, right? Is we
Yeah.
now have more generations in the workforce than probably we've ever had,
Yeah. Ever
and
before. Yes.
ever before. Isn't that crazy? And
It is.
so when it comes to like interacting with each other and having these conversations and getting to know each other, what observations have you seen in your work with different companies in maybe how we are or maybe are not navigating those different needs and expectations of the generations? And are we as leaders supposed to be adjusting our style to fit those generations? And can we even do that effectively?
I love that. So, I try to keep up and continue to do research. And so, yes, so we have the most generations in the workplace than ever before. People are not only living longer in the United States and abroad. However, people are staying in work longer. And so, I was on a call this week. I was on a call a few weeks ago of people who are in first and second retirements, right? And they were in CEO roles. So they're like, yes, I've retired. And then
Yeah.
this is like my next post retirement. And someone had like retired twice. And they're like, this is my right role for a few years. And so that's pretty unprecedented to
Yeah.
have people, who have retired one or multiple times who are now leading organizations. And so when you add that to right the Gen Z
Mhm.
generation coming in, it's very different. I'm a millennial, so when I was in college is to date myself is when Facebook first started, and so you just think about my college experience, right? Very different than
Right.
someone now, right? Like everything was just starting with social media. I can't even imagine being a high schooler today. And
Mhm.
so I do believe as leaders, we do have a responsibility if we want to be effective and impactful leaders.
Mhm.
We have a responsibility to learn about how do we meet these 5 generations that may
Mhm.
be interacting together at one time, right? COVID, like when we just think about people who are coming up now and into their first job, and you just think about your mind and the things you experience, and that they had 3 years of their life before that impacted by a global pandemic, right? I mean, I just can't even fathom. And so I think as leaders, we have to decide, do we kind of just bury our head, or turn
Mhm.
our head, or do we embrace this messy, difficult, beautiful fact that we have all of these generations interacting together? And I think what you just said, right? The talking I've seen just becomes the most important part, is creating those psychologically safe spaces where people can share. Like, oh, I feel, maybe I felt you dismissed me because I was young or
Right.
because I was older, and where people can talk through that of like, oh no, you actually remind me, right, of my
Yeah.
dad or something like that. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why, and it's not your age.
It's interesting. We notice that the generations do tend to gravitate to their own generation, and so when we talk about people not sort of engaging with people they don't know, it's
Yes.
been fascinating to watch that our staff tend to gravitate toward people who are in the same generational demographic as they are. And what happens there is they don't have those sort of cross generational conversations to find those similarities. And one thing that struck me, when I went to the US Open this year, I brought my niece, and I never usually bring a guest to the Open. It's not something I've done, and my niece is 21, and so I wanted her to have that experience. And we went down to the 9/11 memorial, and
Yeah.
we didn't go to the museum. I've been there before, but we went to the memorial, and I'm thinking, she was born after 9/11. I was very early in
That's
my
like hard
career.
food. I'm like,
It's
what?
very hot, right? It's
Wow.
mind blowing, right? And so I'm thinking, she probably doesn't have a lot of context for that. And for me, that was a very pivotal moment for my life
Yeah.
and my career. That I was 3 years into my career. This happened, in many ways, it defined so much of my world. And she said something to me that really struck me. We were walking around, and I said, this is what used to be here. I used to come to New York all the time growing up in New Jersey, and this is what this used to look like. And she said, my generation is the generation that was born from 9/11, and we graduated high school during COVID, and our whole life has been defined by these two events. And I had to sit with that for
Mm.
a moment and think. The first thing I thought is, you didn't experience 9/11. You weren't here,
Right, right. Yeah.
And but I sat with that and I thought, you know what? She's right. Is that you
Yeah.
have a generation that very much views their pocket of the world in sort of this very chaotic, traumatic
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
It helped me understand her better
Yep.
she's a Gen Z. And then I think what was lacking there is that the lack of curiosity about what was that like to be working together. So we just ended up talking about. I said, well, this is where I was working and this is what I was doing. And it struck me as like, there's so much we don't understand about each other that we don't sit down
Yes.
and talk about, like, how do you see yourself in the world, today? And
Yes.
just to really sit and listen and enjoy that. And I think about that when I walk around the office, and I think about, I love talking to our staff who are from younger generations. And I also enjoy talking to our staff who are from older generations, and
Yep.
they have a perspective that I also do not have. So that talking to each other and that sharing, I continue to try to push people to, like, talk to everyone else. And we have a lot of staff who are very good at doing that. They'll sort of get out of their bubbles, but it's hard. It's
It's
really hard.
hard, right? Most of us want to be comfortable, and we want to talk to people who know exactly what we're talking about, right? It's much more difficult to go, okay, we were told you weren't born yet. And
Right.
this is right. And I mean, like, that's just more difficult. But I've just been really leaning into this season, this year, just like hearing people's stories and right, like not having to react, not feeling like you have to have
Yes.
an answer back other than like, wow, thank you for sharing.
Mm.
And, my family, multiple members, with my mom and with my mother-in-law, we got them this gift this year. And it's called Storyworth. And so we actually send them questions and then they type answers.
Oh, that's so cool.
And when I tell you the things that, both me and my husband have learned about our mothers, like as people, it's just like mind blowing. And the fact that hopefully one day we'll get to pass these stories down. And I think, this may seem like, oh, Antoinetta, yes, that's personal. This is work. However, I feel like in workplaces and organizations, we have missions and we have visions and we have values. And how do we carry along these stories, right? Of
Yeah.
this is the organization and this is the heart of the organization. And I think we need more of that in organizations, of having timelines that new people can come in, having stories. Because often when you're coming in, you're just very wide-eyed and like
Yeah.
trying to, the fire hose of like everything's coming. But if
Right.
you can just have a day of whether it's just like storytelling of like
I
this is
love that
who this
idea.
organization
Yeah.
is, like, it's different. Then it's not just, okay, this is the place that I come to
Yeah.
work and these are just my
Yeah.
coworkers.
That's so powerful. Thank you for that, for sharing that, because I don't think we do that super well here. We probably don't do it very much at all. It happens more organically, but
Yep.
I'd
Yep.
love to see some ways that maybe we can do that better here. Um, so this next question is a little bit difficult. It's something I feel very personally, and
Yeah.
eh, you know, as a leader, when you step into a role where you may be the face of an organization, or you're asked to make choices and decisions, um, you kind of are expected to fit this persona, right? And we probably all fit it in some way, right? There's some aspects of it that might come naturally to us, but I find sometimes that the persona can overtake your individual humanity. So when people say be an authentic leader, but don't be
Yeah.
too authentic, like
Yeah. Yes.
you sort of there's a trade-off there of like, I've accepted this role, and then sometimes that role becomes consuming in a way that you can't really feel like you are this individual and you're this human that has
Yep.
all these similar needs and flaws that like other humans have. So in your experience, what are some of the ways that we can stay true to ourselves and preserve our humanity and our authenticity while also being effective leaders?
Yeah, that, gosh, like, why I started my company, and we're going through a shift, and we're adding more components, but so we're Courage Candy Co now, and our core has been I Follow the Leader, and we're even keeping our podcast that, because just that story of like why I got into this work, why I got into culture work, is because I believe, where can we have more spaces where diverse voices can be uplifted? And so, we have to look at the context of our country or whatever country people are in, of like, if you think about who is a leader, most of us have an image of what would come up. And if you don't personally fit that, it can be very difficult,
Mhm.
not only to see yourself as a leader, but also for others to see you as a leader. And so I
Mhm.
know for me as a Black female, I didn't often like see leaders that looked like me, leading organizations, leading nonprofits, which I was in the nonprofit field for most of my career. And as I just started unpacking layers, and talking to all these CEOs across the country for my master's project paper, I realized, like, just what we talked about in the beginning, each leader really has to define for themselves who they are. And if not, then other people are going to try to define it for you. And so I think we have to decide what's most important to us, our values, and then let that determine how we lead. I also believe that we have to state, right, that as leaders, people don't just get all of this access to us just because they want it. So whether that's on social media, whether that's, employees wanting to know about personal lives and, why don't you have kids or why do you do this? Like that people don't actually have to know that for us to be effective leaders. And so I think it's challenging. I think we've seen a lot of burnout in leaders. I think we've seen a lot of depression in leaders, especially just in this social media age of you have to do this, you have to do that. And I think as leaders, we have to really say, right, this is what I really enjoy doing and this is what I don't, right? As leaders, we don't all have to speak out on every single issue unless, right, it's part of your role.
Right. And I think that is part of the authenticity that we lose. And I hope, if there's one thing sometimes I wish people would understand is that you can't have an authentic leader that's also all things to all people. Those are in polar opposites of the scale, is that and I think having the ability to say we want a leader who's authentic and who's human, and similarly, I can't have an expectation that, my staff come to the office and they check their personas at the door and they say, okay, now I'm going to adopt working me, right? That's been talked about a lot, like bringing yourself to the office in a professional manner, but still be true to yourself. Like have a desk with the things that are meaningful to you and what you like on them that speak to you. You have that ability. And I think the more we can give leaders that grace too, to say, my office has all the things that I care about in it surrounding me, and it makes me feel comfortable, and it makes me at least have a little piece of, my family and my friends here with me when I come to work every day. But like you said, but you don't get access to everything. There are some pieces of me that are just for me. And I think that's okay to tell people that you don't have to let everyone into your world.
Yeah, and I just love that word you said, grace, right? So we have to realize that the values we hold, are we also giving that to others? And so the things that we want to receive from our leaders, our other coworkers, are we also gifting that? And I think often if we pause, and we've all done this, the things we may want from our leaders, are we actually gifting that to our leaders as well? And realizing our leaders are human, right? They have lives they go home to. And I think we talked about this, but just in this social media age, people feel like you have to do this. And something I said was like, you don't deserve all my receipts, right? Like I don't
love that quote. That is my new favorite quote of you do not deserve all of my receipts.
No, we don't have to share, right? Like everything in our life or why we are the way we are, right? Like if I say I'm an empath or this has defined me, like I don't have to go into grave detail of what made me an empath. Or if I say I've gone through a lot of traumatic things, so conflict isn't fun for me, right? I don't actually have to say all those traumatic things.
It's amazing to me. Sometimes this happens where, people will see a portion of you as a leader and they will start to tell you about yourself without knowing. You don't know who I am, what makes me tick. We've never even really spoken or had an interaction. And I think that something that social media has exacerbated, that it's like, I get to see this picture of you, and therefore I draw X conclusions about the type of person you are. And I think I shared this with you before. I drive a truck. That surprises everyone. Everyone, when I roll up in the truck and they're like, what, not, and they always say the same thing, not what I expected. And my answer is always, what did you expect? Because that tells me a lot about sort of how they might frame me in the world. And of course, my staff know. They know I drive a truck. They know why. They know, what I do and my hobbies. But it's funny to me a lot of times that people will see you in a leadership role, they'll see like pieces of you and automatically assume that they know you, they know your values, they know what makes you tick.
Yes.
And what I love about what you said is that you don't need to explain yourself, your heart, your motivations to everyone. You get to
No.
choose. And to me, it's like, you know, I think that I try to give I try not to make assumptions about anyone and to say, until I know you, have a conversation, hear your stories, hear what you enjoy and like, you know, and who am I to fill in those blanks? But it is what we automatically do. We fill in the
It
holes.
is. It is. Our brain wants to. I mean, like when you read, right? Brains. When you read about the neurons in the brain, and then you read about implicit bias, our brain, right? We have so many thoughts that our brain wants the quick things, right? We don't want to have to think deeply about everything.
Right.
But are we also, right? It's the yes and like, yes, we're going to make quick assumptions. And do we leave room for the pause? Do we leave room for ourselves to be wrong? To go, what? Laura has a truck? Like, do we leave the room? Do we leave the room that could be true?
Right. And it's okay that that doesn't fit the persona.
Yes.
Right.
That you thought, right?
That you thought that, and you know, I think those are real. The wonder happens of learning how different people really are and how, you know, how many different perspectives and talents that they bring. And
yeah, I love it. And that's something we could do, right? Is I love as icebreakers, like what's something people, you know, would be surprised about, right? Like I just bought a kayak. I'm sure, you know, most people listening or watching would not think that I have a kayak, right? Now it's a purple kayak, so people may say, okay, I see you in purple. That
I see you in purple. That doesn't surprise.
But like, I think it's fun to just, right? It's not to shock and awe, but if you can, you know, if you're in a psychologically safe space to like allow different people to see those different layers, because we all do have different identities that are important to us and that inform who we are. And so an activity I love to do in bias training is get people to answer this question. People look at me and see X. I wish they knew why. And you know, like fill in those blanks.
It's been great. It's been great when you've done that. We've learned so much about people.
Yeah. And just even the different generations, I've seen so many people who are older or younger say like, right, you see me as old or you see me as like, I shouldn't be here. And I think just when we do that, we get to see each other's humanity. And we also get to acknowledge, like, I know most people think this about me, but this is actually the truth.
That's so such a good takeaway. I can't wait to do that exercise again because I know you're coming back, and I love to do it with different groups every time because I learn different things. I want to talk about empathy, and you mentioned it earlier, and we've talked about this. Is, you know, being an empathetic leader, which I know there are people who really, really seek this out. Like they want leaders who demonstrate empathy at a high level. But I think what we don't talk about are some of the differences and challenges that come with being a leader that does feel things deeply and does sort of have a good sense of other people's feelings and emotions. So can you talk a little bit about how do empathetic leaders like you feel maybe some pressures differently? And do we need to be extra mindful about burnout when, you know, we might have more tendency toward empathy?
Yeah, I definitely think to answer the last portion of the question first, yes, if you're an empathetic leader and if you really care about individuals, you know, I really recommend people to know themselves as a leader. So I love the, you know, values activity you shared. I really believe in whatever test it is, you know, Clifton strengths, etc., but just knowing your strengths, right? And so for me, I can go to my strengths and right, we share this. I share this with my contractors. I share this with others. Like I'm a learner, right? So like I read my book, you know, my I read the number of books of my age every year, which keeps increasing, which is a fun challenge. I love to learn. I love to challenge myself. And then also one of my themes has to do about the individuals that like I'm such a teamwork person, but I care about each individual, which is beautiful and can be really difficult, right? Because that means if one person is upset or impacted, that impacts me. And so I think it's so important for leaders to dig deeper and to be able to share with their team that like even if you don't feel comfortable going into detail of right, these are my right results, this, and sharing if you feel they're congruent with who you are, because that opens up the humanity and right, creating a space where you can share, right? I've had to tell my team sometimes, y'all, like I'm really exhausted. And so I'm just mentally, emotionally exhausted. And like I need others to step up right now. And that is not always possible, because I know some people are listening are like, I could never say that to my team, right? And so I don't want people to, it takes time to build that space, but I do believe as empathetic leaders, we have to try to create environments where not only everyone else, right, gets seen and heard, each individual gets seen and heard as a person, but that we as leaders also get seen and heard. And I'm just in a lot of leadership groups intentionally with just like empathetic, courageous people. And what I can say, especially in the last 3 years, is knowing when you have to turn things off. Knowing what fuels you. The news does not fuel me. I can't watch but so much of the news. Knowing when you need a social media break, whether it's a day or I often take a month off. Something I did recently was right, made my personal Instagram private for the first time in years.
I support this totally.
And so knowing when you add too much, knowing when you haven't had enough kind of soul refueling to go, I need a day off, or I need a week of no calls, or whatever it is, just really staying true to yourself and knowing when you need to refuel, knowing when you need to just go talk to another leader and go, wow, I'm stressed, even if you can't tell your team that.
It's really important. And I think I am a little different in that I tend to compartmentalize a little differently when it comes to empathy. Even though I feel things very deeply, I'm able to understand the difference between feeling and understanding someone's emotions and then taking action based on their emotions versus those principles and values. Because the example you said, if you have two people on your team that are, say, upset with each other in an instance, I can understand both of their perspectives. I'm not here to choose and say one is more important than the other. And so I have to be able to say, I feel you both, I hear you both. Here's the choice or the decision that gets us to move forward and to move to the next step. So being able to turn off that switch, which I think in times of decision, I'm able to say, I have to turn off my EQ for a minute here in this instance and move forward with the critical thinking part. It's sort of switched back and forth between critical thinking and you don't always get that balance right. Sometimes I'm too heavy on the critical thinking, problem solving. Sometimes I do get too heavy on sort of the empathy and the like, well, I understand. And it's very situational, but I hear you. If I sit too long in the empathy, and there have been times where I've sort of beaten myself up over like feeling bad about an interaction or something that happened. And here I am 2 months later thinking about it. And I just have to tell myself, you have to, I have this little box that says she took a deep breath and she let it go. And I like, you write it on a paper and you throw it away. And I have my team do this. If they come in and they're upset about something and we work through it, I say, okay, write it on the paper and we throw it away, so that you don't consistently have that emotional drain from it. And I've tried to get better at doing that. But what you are saying is that empathy, that feeling things that other people feel, can just sort of it really drains. And if you sit in that space too long, I definitely feel like the burnout is just sitting there
Yeah.
waiting for you.
Yeah, you have to have those boundaries, right? Of like, okay, just like you said, all right, we've talked about this, and now as a leader, I have to make the decision of how we move on or how we move forward. And I think what we see is a lot of people just sitting in it, whether it's through silence, whether it's through fuming. And I love the radical candor framework by Kim Scott because it's caring personally while challenging directly. And that to me is empathy. To some people, right, they may just hear the challenge part, right? But it's caring personally while challenging directly. And I believe, right, that radical candor, that's the best empathy that you can have, because someone's not caring. The opposite, right, is like caring personally while staying silent, which I love. She calls a ruinous empathy.
Yeah, I love that term. I love
Ruinous empathy, right? Or you have, like, on the other side, manipulative insincerity, etc., or obnoxious aggression. And so I really try to live in that radical candor, caring personally while challenging directly, because it's much easier to be in this ruinous empathetic phase. I care. I'm going to hold it. It's going to kind of eat at me or eat at the person. But it's hard. But I believe our job as leaders is to facilitate that, right? Yeah. Caring personally, challenging directly. Like you gave the example, if there's two team members, like, okay, yes, and we have to move forward.
Yes. So good. And for all the other empathetic leaders out there, I mean, find people to talk to, because it's been sort of a gift to me, to talk to someone like Antoinetta or other leaders to say, am I being too empathetic in this space, or am I being too harsh, or am I not listening enough? And being able to be in a place where you don't have shame or judgment and say, this is the situation that is happening. And am I, give me some guidance, advice, some thoughts in that way of like, and I'm very lucky to have people in my network who say, like, yes, I've been in that situation. I know exactly how you feel. I know exactly the challenge you're facing. And it's normal. Sometimes we just need to hear it's normal, actually. Like that helps a lot. There, right? Yes. Yeah. Like it's not you, it's normal. You're going to encounter this and it's totally normal.
Yes.
So last question for today. I know you work with a lot of boards and you also work with a lot of organizations and their employees. So what do you wish board members and employees knew about their leaders who sit in this middle space that maybe we could share here today that would foster more of that greater understanding and more courageous conversations?
Gosh, I love that question. What I wish just board and staff members knew about their leaders is they have to take the time to get to know them. They have to take the time to get to know them. And I'm a big data person. So I'm just a huge data person. And so I would encourage them to look at the touch points. So how many times, and I've been a fundraiser, and so they often say, right, you kind of have to like touch someone, have those 7 touch points before they really know like what you do or who you are. And so I think I would really encourage board members and staff members to try to have those 7 touch points with their leader, or right, if it's not their top leader, right, it could be your manager, but have those 7 touch points before you try to really form a picture. Like really look at leaders.
Nice.
Yeah, no, and I'm like, this question, it was off the cuff, but I'm like, if we look at leaders like a puzzle, and if we just think of it like, until I have these 7 interactions, let me try not to decide who this person is. And so I think that would allow board members, right, that would encourage them. Let me make sure I'm at meetings. Let me make sure if it's in person, I'm a little, right, and I can talk to the leader or have 5 minutes. I think staff members, something I always tried to do, which may have been seen as like, what is she doing? But, making sure even if the top leader wasn't my supervisor, that I would set some time
Yes.
aside, right? Whether it's once a year because they're
Yes.
busy. And like I was in a very large nonprofit, but like, hey, can we have lunch once a year, whatever it is? Because the more we get to know people, the more we see them as this person. And so if we can look at leaders as like not this puzzle to solve, but this puzzle to get to know, right? Like the best puzzles, I'm not a puzzle person, but the best puzzles, right, have a beautiful image at the end. And if that was our goal, versus I'm like trying to peel back the layers. Who is she inside? But just to get a better picture and view, I think we would have some really awesome organizations.
I think so too. And that was actually one of the takeaways from the leadership training I did. We all had to write down like something we were going to work on, and one of my weaknesses when I'm working with the team that we have at our national office is, not doing enough of like, hey, this is somebody that is working on a project that maybe I don't understand or I don't
Yep.
naturally see as a fit for me. So what I tend to do is just say, well, I'm just going to like forget about that and go about my everyday business versus being curious about it and calling them up and saying, you know what, those are the things I want. Tell me more about this and learn that
Yes.
person, learn about that thing that doesn't seem like a fit to me versus the things that I'm like, yes, that is a fit for our organization and something I want to pursue. So I made that commitment to say I need to ask more questions and provide more
Mhm.
interaction and critical thinking on the people and projects that I don't understand and that I am
Yeah.
trying to be like, I don't know why. Why are we doing this? Right? And I think that's great advice for me. And I also, I love talking to our team and kudos and shout out to the members of my team who some of them will come down here, different times of day and say hello. And we talk about all kinds of things. And sometimes they get shamed for that. I'm very aware that you said, people didn't understand why you did that. And I think sometimes people are like, oh, they're trying to gain favor,
Yeah.
this, that,
Oh
but
yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah. But the truth is that that's just a people skill to say, the more you know about people, the better you are at navigating those relationships.
Yes.
Um, and no, I don't give extra money to the people that come and talk to me.
Right, right. No, right? Like,
But it is
but then
nice
you're
to
also
know
seen
them.
as a person,
Yes.
right? Like you deserve for people to also ask you, how are you? And
Yes.
I had a meeting this week and I was teaching about a DEI framework, but I realized the world has been heavy. And so I'm like, this may seem crazy, but we only have 60 minutes. But the first 15, I'm just going to ask how you are. And we had a small enough group, and I didn't know most of the individuals. And gosh, if we wouldn't have done that, right, it would have they would have had an experience with me, but I would have known nothing really about each of them. And people were able to go, I'm exhausted, or I'm doing really great. We
Right.
have this coming up, or oh, my teenagers are driving me crazy, or whatever it was. But now, right, I got to know them as the human before we went into the work mode.
Yes.
And so, if we just will take that time, 5, 10 minutes to just go, how are you
Yes.
today?
Yes. So important. And I will say we have an incredible team and they really do interact with each other really well. And I'm very, very lucky. And I have a wonderful board as well that does take the time to get to know me. And so I feel a little gifted here that I have such a great group that does these things.
Yes,
But
yes.
it doesn't hurt to say, let's continue to reinforce them. And for those that are out there that maybe are new to a leadership role, or
Yes.
maybe the noise that's been out there is really starting to weigh on you of like, hey, the world's telling me I should be these 57 things and and I feel like a failure. I don't know how I can do it. And I feel like I'm constantly being judged. If those people can hear and know like, hey, here's some really practical things that would help you, and it's okay to be a human. It's okay to absolutely be
It
an
is.
authentic human. And that these things are normal.
They are, and to make mistakes, right? So that's something I really had to do with my team and even our clients to go, we're gonna make mistakes. And if you could just like put that on the table, as a leader, I'm going to make mistakes. As a leader, I'm going to miss deadlines sometimes. And guess what? You own it,
Yeah.
right? If you're willing to own it and go, hello, I'm really sorry. We have to get this to you tomorrow, right? Or often we're taught, don't say sorry. As a leader, I just started being like, what do I feel? Like, I get it. They're like, as a woman, don't say sorry. People will look at you weak as this person. And I just like started just leaving it all. If I feel sorry, I'm going to say I'm sorry, right? Like, we got to stop playing these games because then it feeds into some of these systemic things, which is why some people don't feel like leadership is for them.
Oh,
and if you can care about people, leadership is for you. Like,
that's, one of my board members says, if you have a heart for service, this organization is for you. And, I think there's a lot of this sort of like, we talk about performative work on DE&I, but I think there's performative work on the leadership side, right? You can perform as a leader. You can certainly check the boxes and be that persona. But I think the truth is that, is your heart really in that right place? Like, do you have the best interests of the organization and the humans in your care? And yes, you can still make mistakes, and that doesn't mean that your heart isn't more in it, versus, a performative leader, which is going to look good all the time and it's going to fit and check all of the boxes and never make mistakes, but not really be invested enough to kind of move the organization, care for the people, and do that work. So I think the performative side of leadership is certainly something that we all deal with, but if you really truly care and you really want to devote your time and energy, I do think leadership is for you. And I think a lot of it is just learning, learning from the mistakes, learning from the failures, talking to people like you and saying, what can I do different, better? How do I deal with this? It's all a wonderful learning journey.
I so appreciate this conversation because, right, people don't really talk about the performative side of leadership, or what do you do as an empathetic leader? How do you make sure, right, that you still get to do your great work? And something you told me, gosh, like touched my heart, right? Like, we also have to know, like, we've done enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's so powerful. We have to remember as leaders, you don't have to give every piece of yourself to others, because then you have nothing else for you or your family or your loved ones. And I think a lie that has been sold is like, you have to work every second of every day to be the best leader. And I think we have to go back to our personal missions. And if we don't have it, we could get so lost. And so for me, it's helping people consistently cultivate courage to reach their highest potential. I don't say 10 million people, right?
Right.
10 million people, right? Yeah. And so we have to go back to like that thing. And I just appreciate you saying that to me, because it's like, yeah, we don't have to give, right, all of ourselves. Like, that's not healthy either.
Yes. And I've fallen into that trap many a time, and I've had to remind myself. So I think that's a great point to end on. You don't have to give all of yourself, but you do have to have the heart for serving others and serving your organization. Antoinetta, you are such a gift to me and to our organization. We're so happy that we've been able to work with you. Thank you for your daily texts. And thank you for spending this time with me today to share all of your great wisdom and insights on leadership. It's really been great. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Can't wait to share this with all the leaders I know, because we need more conversations like this. And so I just thank you, Laura, and the team for having me on, and just grateful for you as a person for reminding me just about leadership. So thank you.
You're welcome. We'll have many more conversations, I'm sure.
That's all for this edition of USTA Florida's Here to Serve podcast. For more episodes of the podcast, including upcoming topics, guests, and dates, please visit USTAFlorida.com/here to serve. Thank you for tuning in and have a wonderful day.